ready to have your sleep disturbed. In today's video, we're sharing unsettling tales that are perfect to listen to before bed. Creepy stories that will send shivers down your spine and make you second-guess the darkness. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm creating these videos to raise funds for my dad's medical treatment, and your support makes a world of difference. If you'd like to help, you can find the GoFundMe link in the description below. Thank you for being here. And now, let's dive into these spine-chilling stories. Story 1. I'll be the first to say that all of this could have taken place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Sorry for the length. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mum owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mum could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out wasn't covering the costs either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and they were finalizing the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So, for that month, the cabin wasn't going to be rented out anymore, and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of everything that had happened. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car, the one he had willed to me, to the cabin. Now, this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we weren't using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarms, so I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and let them know I was staying there. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but I felt the need to mention it anyway. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing unusual happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and in the evenings playing PlayStation, listening to music, drinking, and smoking out on the balcony. I already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional trips to the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs, PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room, a side guest bedroom, and a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he has since passed, playing games and watching DVDs. That day, there was pretty heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like tracking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All the other cabins, aside from these 2, were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees tall. This is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Now, let me jump to the weirdness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I hadn't noticed. Maybe they were shit-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The prints led away from my cabin and disappeared into the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog, Midnight, was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed, staying silent. I was kind of freaked out and could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After about 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance, signaling that he needed to pee or wanted to go outside. Shit, well fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out I wasn't going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. It was a bit unusual for him, but alright, maybe there were forest animals out there he wanted to chase down. But fuck this, I didn't want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside, and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of about 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and quickly ran to the balcony screen door, expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time, I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So, I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird, must have been all in my head. What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I kept smoking, just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position between 2 branches. It was squatted on one branch, and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. Fuck me, what the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, so I just sat there, motionless, staring. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me, lightly barking at the same time. The thing still didn't move. I put my cigarette out and was debating whether or not to shine the light in its direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So, I walked backwards into the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in that direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. Later on in the night, I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and didn't stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I eventually passed out and woke up in the morning, and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful, and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have been all in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time, so I was pretty messed up from all the drama. Story 2. Being American Indian, my family has a lot of stories about supernatural things. One of these is the infamous skinwalker, which is said to appear if you even dare to discuss it. So, I went online and read some experiences people had with that kind of thing and came across a pretty scary story. Some guy and his friends had a 3-day weekend. So they drove out to an old mission in California and saw some creepy stuff skulking around the place: clothes, skeletal bits, paintings on the walls. When they left, they began joking that they should drive faster before they got shot with an arrow or anything. One of them began to explain the concept of skinwalkers, and among all the bullshitting, the driver hit a coyote, but said it looked too big to be one. They got out to find nothing anywhere near the car or under it, so they got in and kept driving. As they drove away, they saw, behind them, a coyote-looking figure, about the size of, or even bigger than a man, walking over the ridge on its hind legs. Story 3. This is more my dad's story than mine. He used to tell me a story about his grandfather renting a house in northern New Hampshire. The door to the cellar would open at various times on its own. Come spring, his grandfather went into the cellar to create a cold room for storing vegetables over the winter. He noticed one of the cellar walls had collapsed stone and went to repair it. After removing a few stones, he found a woman's shoe, which was attached to a leg bone, which continued into a whole skeleton. He said it must have been a ghost that was opening the door, and it was left at that. As I got older, I figured he was just trying to scare me. After he passed away 6 years ago, I found, among his things, a newspaper article recording this event of finding the skeleton. It was during the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. It seems his grandfather went to seek help. They wended their way through the woods, and after removing the skeleton, the daughter was able to identify her mother from the clothes she was wearing. The daughter had assumed her mother had taken off west with a man. Story 4. This is going to sound familiar, but this was passed around long before the internet version gained popularity, and may even be the original story. There was a young woman who moved into a new apartment in the relatively rural Saitama area. Everyone knows it's good manners to introduce yourself to your neighbors when you move into a new area, so she knocks on the door of the unit to the right of her apartment. A kindly old lady answers the door, and the two exchange pleasantries for a few minutes. After saying goodbye, she tries the door on the left. No answer. Figuring the neighbor must be out now, she decides to introduce herself later, and decides to rest for now. Later that evening, she tries the neighbor to the left again, but no answer. She was again met with silence when she tried the following day, and the day after. She checked with the old woman next door and confirmed there was someone living there after all. She was confused, but not too worried. She attributed it to bad timing or a vacation. However, it may have just been her imagination. But she could have sworn that just before bed, she heard heavy breathing from the room on the left. A week later, while cooking an early dinner one day, she noticed a hole in the wall connecting her apartment to her neighbor's. She decided to take a look through the hole to sat her curiosity about the missing neighbor. Uncomfortable with the idea of spying on someone, she hesitated briefly, pressed her eye to the opening, then frowned. She saw nothing, just red. She wasn't sure what that meant. Maybe he disliked the default white and painted his walls red. She was nearly sure that was against the rules, so she went next door to talk to the old lady again. "Excuse me, I just had a question. Do you know if we are allowed to paint the walls of our units?" "Oh, of course not. Where would you get that idea?" Frustrated, the young woman finally decides to ask directly. "I'm sorry, but could you tell me about the tenant on the other side of me? I haven't seen or heard from him, and it's starting to get eerie." "Oh, your next door neighbor. He's a nice lad, but I'm afraid he's very sick. I don't know the details, but I know he has to take his meals inside the house and rarely leaves." "Oh, but I did see him once. He looked so sick, the poor thing. You could see the broken veins showing through his pale skin, and his eyes were solid red." Story 5. I went to a Jesuit college, so naturally, we have hordes of ghosts and otherwise unsettled spirits roaming our campus. My favorite is from my freshman year. A few years ago, Anra was moving into my former freshman dorm and getting all of the room checks, paperwork, and general RA duties done. As he walked into the last wing of the building, he noticed that all the mattresses were flipped on their sides, so that they were perpendicular to the bed frames. He restored them to their natural positions and called the other RAs together to tell them what a funny joke they played. None of them had any clue what he was talking about, since they were all taking care of other dorms. The next day, he woke up early to go for a run, only to notice that once again, someone had flipped the mattresses back onto their sides in the middle of the night. He put them back normally, went for his run, and went about his business, checking rooms in a different building. The very next morning, the mattresses were, you guessed it, perpendicular to the bed frames. Impressed, pissed off, and slightly creeped out, this RA decides to stake out the building, 90s style, with an RA buddy that night after restoring the natural order of the cinder block mattresses from the dorm, just across from the original. As the hours drift away to the tune of the Mission Impossible theme, he notices that all of the lights on this floor simultaneously turn on, a feat that should have been impossible to coordinate between the sheer number of rooms and the shabby 1900s era engineering. As the two sprint back into the dorm, they are greeted by a young Jesuit priest who tells them that the problem has been taken care of. They find the mattresses in what is the widely accepted position for the torture devices and go their separate ways. The next day, the RA goes to the Jesuit quarters on campus to thank the priest and sees a picture of him on the wall while waiting to meet with the headmaster. He points to the picture and says, "Father, do you know where that priest is? He was in his dorm last night, and I wanted to thank him for helping me out with a bit of a problem." The elderly Jesuit laughs and says, "Son, Father so-and-so died when I was an undergraduate here." To this day, Jesuit ghosts are known to haunt that same dorm, offering aid in conjugating Latin verbs and finding lost objects. Story 6. Not creepy, but definitely unsettling. It was August 21st, 2012, my 25th birthday. I was just about to get off a 12-hour shift in the ER. It was almost time to turn the shift over to the night crew. Right around 7 p.m., it felt almost like a movie. The second team came in, passing patient orders and details to the next shift. The code blue was called cardiac arrest. I don't care who you are, how long you've been working in medicine, or how many deployments you've done, a code blue scares anyone. It was my first code. She was 15, a nice young girl. We had seen her in the ER for a persistent fever, neck stiffness, and fatigue, signs and symptoms pointing towards meningitis. Our team made it upstairs with our crash boxes and gear, and everyone else was already working. I was working on getting new IV access, because the inpatient ward was getting ready to discharge the patient. The next half hour or so was just a blur after that. People moving around, orders being shouted, chest compressions, people rotating in and out of her room, a strange, organized chaos when I think about it. I still remember telling my ER doc that she was way too young to die. He just told me to keep the chest compressions going. I forget how many sets I did. I was tired. I was broken. I didn't know what else to do. Now it gets worse. Her mother was watching the entire time. I still remember her mother's screams and crying. I don't think I've heard anything more bone-chilling. I still think about it from time to time. It was hands down the worst day of my life. Just trying to do what I could to help, hearing a hysterical woman wail and scream over losing her only child, reliving that night over and over and over, wishing it would go away, but it doesn't. The sounds of the monitor going asystole still haunt me. Her pupils still pierce my dreams. Her mother's crying and wails still ring in my ears. It never goes away. I wish I could make it stop. I really do. Story 7. When I was a dopey little kid, I went to a family reunion at a campground. One evening, as my cousins, aunts, and uncles were playing games, I stayed with one cousin by the fire. We were about 9 or 10 and stupid. When the fire started dying, we wanted to add some wood. Not finding any, we did find a saw and thought, hey, the trees are made of wood. We were at least smart enough to cut dead-looking branches, but this was in a national forest, and it was illegal. Now, the fire was along the main road in the campground, and a passing motorist noticed our misdemeanor and decided to perform his civic duty. So, he stopped, children in the back seat, and pulled out a shotgun. He started yelling, "Hey kids, stop chopping down that tree." We froze, and he continued yelling, saying that he was going to protect the forest from us. The shouting attracted the rest of my family, including my very tall, very imposing father, who did not like his son being threatened by a nutbag. Now, my father worked for the Forest Service and knew what we were doing was wrong, but he felt that threatening to preteens with a violent death over a tree was somehow worse than cutting off a few branches. The short man with a gun eventually got in his car and left after my father promised to punish us. He did not. He did give us a good talking to, and we burned the evidence. It was very smoky. My dad talked to the park ranger, and they went to find the individual. This is not the creepy part. Normally, my family camped in tents, but this year we had borrowed an RV. The next morning, I slept in on my uncomfortable bed, made from a table that folded down. Everyone else was already up, making breakfast. We still cooked over the fire end. I was dead asleep when there came a sudden tapping and knocking. I couldn't figure out who was knocking, so I locked the door. I didn't peek out. The knocking continued and got more insistent. At last, they started turning the knob back and forth and trying to open the door. I sat frozen in place as the paltry plastic door rattled on its hinges. Whoever it was started banging and pulling and then rattling the windows as well. I didn't know what to do, so I crawled under my table bed. There was a sudden whoop from a police car siren and a momentary flash of red and blue. The rattling and the knocking stopped. Footsteps scurried along the gravel outside the RV, and an engine roared to life. The car sped away, and the park ranger's car took off after it. I later learned that it was the same man. The rangers hadn't been able to find him the night before, but we had given them a description. Because of his threats, my dad had asked the rangers to stop by periodically. He was eventually caught, though I never found out what happened to him. I never tried to chop down a tree in a national forest again. Story 8. This is 100% true, and to this day, no one would believe me if I didn't have my mom or brother to back me up. I've suffered from insomnia my entire life, which began the summer before second grade. It was in the spring, and I was lying in bed watching a movie on a small TV my parents had gotten for my nightstand. It was about 5:15 a.m. when, all of a sudden, all of the sound around me started to slowly fade out, like someone turning the volume down on the radio, until it was silent. As I was reaching for the TV to turn up the volume, thinking something had gone wrong with the TV, I was overwhelmed by complete euphoria. It was the most tranquil, peaceful feeling I had ever experienced. The first thought that popped into my head was, I am dying, but it's okay. The only rational explanation was that I was dying, but I was so overwhelmed with peace that I turned over in bed to accept my fate. Keep in mind that I was a second grader, and this should not have been my thought process. I just knew. That's when I saw it. A bright, glowing white figure in my doorway. My brother's room was across the hall, so I called out his name, telling myself it was him, but nothing. The figure glided to the end of the bed. Suddenly, in the tranquility, I began to feel panic, because I knew something wasn't right. But I still felt so peaceful, and I couldn't break out of the trance-like state I was in. The figure hovered beside my bed and stayed with me for what felt like forever. Then, suddenly, there was a flash. All the sound came back, and the feeling of peace went away. My immediate reaction was, what in the actual fuck? I just saw a ghost. I ran across the hall and dove into my brother's bed. I was hysterical and kept crying that I had seen a ghost. My brother was freaked out, and we hid under the covers. He did his best to calm me down. Suddenly, the phone began to ring and ring and ring and ring. We both froze in fear, and it rang again and again and again. I peeked out from the covers and saw the bright green numbers on the clock. 5:30. We turned on every light in the house and started watching cartoons. My mum woke up at 6 and was livid that we were up so early. Josh was defending me as I kept telling her I had seen a ghost. She got upset and started telling me I had a wild imagination, but then I yelled. The phone rang, the clock said 5:30, and the phone rang. It was the ghost. Go check the phone. She checked the phone and went into the other room, only to come back and tell me it was a telemarketer. I was so scared I wouldn't even go get socks out of my dresser, but suddenly she was more understanding and no longer angry. It was my brother's birthday that day, so I figured she was just trying to let it go. The next day, I got home from school, and she told me to come sit on the couch with her. She put me in her arms and said, "I'm gonna tell you something, but I don't want you to get too upset, okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Your grandma passed away at 5:30 the other night. That was just her coming to tell you how much she loved you before she left." To this day, I still get chills thinking about it. Not creepy chills, it was just a really surreal experience. Story 9. About a year ago, I went camping with some friends. We didn't pack up and leave until midday, so I wasn't going to get back to the city until well past midnight. I had to fuel up, so I pulled into a gas station in the middle of a woodland nowhere. As I pull in, I noticed another truck at the pumps and people looking out of the windows. It was a little strange because they were just standing there, staring as I fueled up. Then one of them, a woman, starts pounding on the window. I finish and go in, and she asks me if it was still out there. I thought she was talking about a bear. Then the attendant yells, "There it is." I look out there, and under the truck was this pale, naked, childlike thing. It was kind of yellowish, with blue bruises. That's the best I can describe. It had a large head, not like alien large, but just too big. It was lying on its stomach, bobbing its head like an infant that can't support itself. I was freaked out. I was just outside with that thing. I wanted to run to my truck and get the hell out of there, but it was underneath it. I asked if we should call the cops, but the attendant said the sheriff's department was on its way. They told me it just showed up. It stayed there for about 30 minutes, then dragged itself into the woods, trembling and weakly bobbing its head. I've never run so goddamn fast as when I charged the truck. Fuck the Northwoods, I haven't gone camping since. Story 10. Have you ever heard the story of the rubber-eyed girl? How she's described changes over time. In the 40s, they called her a ghost. By the 70s, she was thought to be a machine created by a lonely madman who lost his daughter. Recently, people believe she's an alien creature sent for unknown purposes. Regardless of what people think she is, all witnesses agree on one single feature: her motionless, soulless, rubber-like eyes. Nobody is sure when the first abduction took place. Go missing all the time for various reasons. It wasn't until one particular night that the abductions were associated with the rubber-eyed girl. A mother was home with her daughter. The husband was late at work, at least that's what he told his wife to cover up his affair. It was time to put the daughter to bed. "No, Mummy," she pleaded, hoping to play with her toys a little longer. "I'm not ready for bed. I want to play." The mother, not in the mood for this overplayed game, slammed her fist down on the counter. No words were needed. The daughter closed her mouth and quickly shuffled to her room. The little girl tossed and turned in her bed, unable to sleep. It wasn't that she still wanted to play with her toy set, was something different, something uneasy. A deep sense of anxiety washed down from the top of her spine into the pit of her stomach. Something was very wrong. She hid under her covers in an attempt to shield herself from whatever dark forces were around her, a technique Daddy had taught her when she got scared at night. He also taught her to calm herself by counting to 10 slowly, with deep breaths. 1, 2, 3. She started, already feeling the tension begin to fade. 4, 5, she continued. Before she could say 6, she heard a quick whisper, inches away from her face. Too mortified to pull the covers off and see what was next to her, she froze, listening closely to see if the sound would return. 6, 7. An ethereal voice whispered into her ear, its breath smelling of vinegar and blood. Overwhelmed by fear, the little girl let out a screech as she shoved the covers off and tried to hop out of bed. Just as she pushed the covers off, but before she could escape, the creature in the room pinned her down. Still whispering into her ear, it continued. 8, 9, 10. The little girl screamed in terror as she stared at its face, or rather, her own face. The creature looked exactly like the little girl in every way except for one. Its eyes. The mother rushed into the room, just in time to see her daughter dragged out of the window by the creature. She ran to the window, tears pouring down her face, screaming for the creature to bring her daughter back. The creature froze, turned around, and stared at the mother with an expressionless face. The last thing the mother saw before the creature disappeared into thin air, taking her daughter with it. With those motionless, soulless, rubber eyes. Thank you so much for tuning in. If these stories gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more unsettling tales. Your support helps me continue creating content, and most importantly, it helps raise funds for my dad's medical treatment. If you're able to donate, the GoFundMe link is in the description below, and every little bit counts. Also, I'd love to hear your own creepy stories. If you've experienced anything unsettling, drop it in the comments. I might feature it in a future video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.